La vida es corta sin parar, mirar y de reír para celebrar. Cada momento hay que gozar, como si mañana no va a llegar.
Hola, hola. Welcome to Entre Tías Amiguis, the podcast where we dive into the wild roller coaster ride of adulting. I'm your host, Adri Rodriguez, a queer Salvadorian native, a first-gen trailblazer, a multipreneur and licensed psychotherapist, here to share wisdom, stories, and real talk with my tías and amiguis and other incredible guests who inspire and uplift our community. I want to remind you that while I am a licensed psychotherapist, this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The discussions we have here are not substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Now let's dive into today's conversation and explore the journey of adulting together. Grab your cafecito, get comfy, and let's get started. Hi everyone, this is Adri Rodriguez from Entre Tías y Amiguis, a podcast dedicated to the wild roller coaster ride of adulting, the ways that we heal, the ways that we thrive, the ways that we grow. And today I have a very special guest here with me that I just recently finally came to be in community, finalmente en persona, because I've been following you, watching your journey for a while. And so it has been such a pleasure to get to hear your story. And so today we get to go in a little bit more. I always start with sharing that myself. I'm an immigrant. I came to the United States when I was 16. I'm a daughter of immigrants. My family immigrated in the 90s after the war in El Salvador. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a photographer. And I always start sharing all those things about me because, everything that I do is with that lens, right? Like, soy una terapeuta, but it's like immigrant, first gen. So all of the ways of my identity crosses over, right? Like, informs the lens of all the things that I do. The experiences that I've had in the past always inform the things that I'm doing now in the present, and then also hoping to heal from some of those towards building the future, right? And so I always like to start with my guests and inviting them to share any of their identities or any parts of the story as they feel comfortable, that also informs the work, but also the journey of how you got here. And so today we have Yvonne and Menda, and I would love to pass the mic to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are in your journey.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And I love that you start with that because I think it's one of the things that we don't often lead with. Unless someone specifically asks us to or we find an opportunity to, we don't. And I think that dilutes our experience within it because you're right. Everything that we do is interconnected to how we show up. I am the daughter of immigrants as well. My mom is de Guanajuato. My dad is from La Ciudad de Mexico, but I grew up with a single mom and 3 siblings. So I'm the oldest of those 3 siblings. I was born and raised in San Francisco. And recently, maybe 2.5 years, I keep saying 2, but it's really about to almost be 3 years, I moved to San Diego just to try something new. I, for the first time, was able to have my own space, not share a room, all that kind of stuff. And it felt very liberating to just
It's
move
like
to a
a
different
grown-up
city.
life.
See, but I didn't wanna go too far from home, right? And I think I sort of did the same when I went to college, actually. I went to UC Berkeley for undergrad, which at the time, my family had moved to San Leandro, porque ya en San Francisco ya estaba muy expensive, right? So in San Leandro, I think we were paying just slightly more for 2 bedrooms versus where we were was a 1-bedroom little area that barely had a kitchen. And when we moved to San Leandro, I said I got accepted to Berkeley. And I actually got accepted to school in LA as well. And I thought I always wanted to go to SoCal, but I was like, you know what? I need to stay a little close to home. I ended up going to Berkeley and it was perfect. I can't imagine not being closer to home. But then when I got back from college, I thought, oh, ya, es tiempo de que vaya, you know, live on my own. And then the pandemic happened. And then it was like, well, why am I going to pay rent somewhere where I'm not even going to get to fully enjoy the city? I can't do anything right now. Let me stay here. And that ended up being a couple more years that I stayed at home. And so finally, I made the move to San Diego, not really knowing anybody. I didn't have any furniture. I drove from San Diego with my partner. I mean, from San Francisco to San Diego with my partner. I had towels, a roll of toilet paper, like stuff to brush my teeth with, and all my clothes, right? And so I said to myself, okay, está bien. And I really stepped into the journey of, oh, let me find my couch. And it was the first time that I decided what kind of couch I wanted in my home. And it seems so simple, but I think it's something that when you grow up low income, first gen,
Mhm.
you're so, and especially I think in my experience as an older sister, you're so consumed with how your actions or what you do impacts everybody else and how you
Yes.
can be of service to other people that this was the first time where, oh, the couch isn't a hand me down. It's something that I'm gonna go buy because tengo trabajo, tengo mi dinero, lo voy a comprar yo sola. I get to decide what it looks like and what the vibe is of where I'm living. And no one else is impacted by this decision of me getting this
Mhm.
couch except for me. And
Mhm.
I think my year living in San Diego on my own just completely transformed my experience. So I always share that because I'm like, a veces no tenemos la oportunidad de vivir solas, and that's
Uh-huh.
really, really important. I think it has been in my journey, and it really was when I stepped up I think my game as far as my business and my content creation and all of that because I said, I have the space to do it. And I don't have to do it late at night when the 3 birds and the 2 dogs and everybody living in the house is finally quiet, right? I could decide when to record, and it seems kinda like a small thing, but it was a really big deal for me, back then and still is today.
It
So
is a
that's a
big
little bit of
deal.
a long introduction.
No, I love that, because actually I just saw something on TikTok, I think recently. It was a video of like a young woman, young person talking about their realization that they were the first woman in their family to ever live alone. And I similarly, I actually reversed to you. I went to San Francisco after I finished grad school, and I lived over there for almost 5 years. And so when that person on TikTok was talking about, like, they were in tears talking about how they were the first woman in their family, it is such a big deal to think about all the ways that the universe had to conspire little by little to get to a position where, like, we can be this women that actually can take care of themselves, be responsible for themselves, make decisions for themselves, because maybe it is a thing that we're starting to take for granted, but it's not something that, like, is that far removed from being, like, probably some of the biggest progress that a person can make to
Oh.
finally have the autonomy to take care of themselves.
Sí, claro, and I honestly, sometimes, it's a mix of emotions too. You feel so proud of yourself, but also kind of ridden with guilt oftentimes. Because I think about my mom. My mom came to the US, to San Francisco from Mexico when she was 15, and my grandma told her, "No, don't go, you can't go," and she's like, "Nope, I'm going," and she crossed with her 2 brothers, and so, she went to high school for a couple months, maybe a year, but didn't finish because, she needed to work. And I think about it, and, like, she never experienced truly living on her own because by the time that she maybe had her own place, it was, "Oh, ahora viene la pareja," right? And the pareja at the time was my dad, and then
Her.
después vienen los niños, and 2 years after that, right, my dad leaves, and now she's by herself, but she's with kids, so she never truly got to experience that what I'm talking about o sea, mis decisiones, they don't impact anybody else. And
Uh-huh.
so I also think it's such a huge responsibility almost to continue talking about it as like a possibility in your own life. I tell my sister this all the time too. She wanted to stay closer to home to go to college, and I was like, "You could totally do that." And I wanna also tell you that if you move away, you'll probably have a completely different experience, not good or bad or whatever, just different, right? And you might grow in different ways if you actually remove yourself from like, learn to be a little bit more independent in that sense and actually be with yourself. I think being with myself, not only because I'm an introvert, but being with myself is truly one of the ways that I've been able to grow, like, beyond the personal development books, beyond anything else, being with
Mhm.
myself and learning to manage my own time,
Mhm.
figuring out what I'm going to do with my own day, and that has been one of the major ways that I think I've grown, and it's given me more than I think any self-help book does.
Amen to that. I mean, like, now you're taking me back to like 15 years ago when I moved away, and it's like, come solita, compra solita, andas de que arriba para abajo solita, right? And then sometimes you do feel the like the loneliness, but overall, I remember my experience. I just felt so empowered. I just felt so like capable, and it's like, si voy a comer solita, pues aunque sea, like girl dinner, right? Like frijolitos or una quesadilla, or sometimes just crackers and like,
Yeah.
sparkling
With
water
esa
or something.
noche.
Con mesa no hay el sillón, right? So, Oh my God, thank you for sharing that. You're such a good storyteller. And so this is like such a perfect segue into the kind of the center of the conversation. There are a lot of things that like different is coming there, the stories are coming through for different folks, right? And so as I asked you to come into the podcast, one of the things that I really wanted to highlight is this business of yours that you have that is all about public speaking, specifically as an introvert. I have a lot of
Thank
questions
you.
about that because it's like you're breaking all the even my own mentalities of like, oh, introverts like enjoy public speaking. Like, that's so fascinating. So I'm gonna ask about all of that, but I wanna kind of go a little bit back to the beginning. You talked about when you sent some information to my way about public speaking has been in your life since high school. So how did this all get started for you? And what has kept you passionate about it? You said over 10 years, right? Because sometimes it's like we start things and then we leave them, but this is something that you found early on and then you still are pushing through. So, can you share a little bit of the story? How did you get into storytelling and public speaking?
Of course. First of all, I'll start off by saying that I think when you find something that you're really passionate about, even if you're scared of doing it, because it's public speaking is something that can be scary and it exposes you a lot. As much as you try to run away from it and say no to opportunities, it keeps following you, right? And
Mhm.
so my professional career as a public speaker started when I was in high school. But when I think back long before, I remember even when I was in elementary school, I would host our cultural events or be the MC for our graduation and read the speeches, right? And I think it's because it ties into me being more of an introvert. And I think first gen, oldest daughter, school always became this like safe space for me to explore my creativity. And again, it was almost like, aquí sí puedo, I have control here.
You smell.
And even when I reflect and think back on my journey, emceeing when I was a little girl, I think whenever every time that I went on the stage, I felt like this is me. There is an expectation of me, yes, of course, but I don't have the oh, Yvonne is shy, Yvonne is quiet, Yvonne this, right? Like all those expectations that people have of me because of my one-on-one interactions with them and being an introvert transform and change and they don't matter when I'm on stage. And so again, so I think things follow you throughout your life and it's like, here's a sign, like keep doing it. You got to do it
Yeah.
as good as you are, kind of thing. When I was in high school, my high school had a curriculum that asked us to present our work every semester in order to pass on to the next grade. So while the
Mm.
state and, requires you to take tests and pass your classes, they did that too. But on top of that, it was this presentation skills. And so it required to take bodies of work that we had done throughout the semester and present them. And we also had as exhibitions. So if there was a project, they found ways to have projects from math, social sciences, English kind of come together to some capacity. And we would present exhibitions about how everything was related to our friends and families. We'd create posters and they'd come and watch us, right? And
Wow.
so one of the years, my speech, like that we all had a benchmark portfolio or a graduation portfolio defense. It was a combination of all of our pieces of work that indicated, hey, we're ready to step on to the next grade. In this case, it was, I'm ready to go to college. These are the reasons why. My work showcases it here. And my particular, I was spotlighted on the teacher channel. So they came and filmed the process of our teachers deliver because it was in front of students and our teachers would grade us and then give us feedback right afterwards. It was this whole process, right? And because of my feature on the teaching channel, other communities and conferences that talked about education and project-based learning started to reach out to me to share my experience as a student within that specific curriculum. And that's how I got my very first keynote. And then once I got that keynote, I think as a first gen, I always say this that because you're right, something that you said at the beginning was being first gen, being the oldest daughter, it all plays a role in how you show up. And I wanted to say no. I didn't want to do it because it was scary. It was an audience of 1,500 people, my first ever keynote. I had
High
thoughts.
schooler.
Yeah, I had thoughts about what I was going to say, but it was scary. But as a first gen, you know, straight A student that I was, because again, school became my safe space, I was like, I can't say no. And I'm a little bit of a people pleaser, and I'm working on that, right? I was like, I can't say no, so I'm just gonna do it, right? And it was the first time that I got paid too, right? I was gonna do it for free, and they sent me a contract over, and I got paid, and I was like, "What? you can make money off of this. This is crazy. So early on into my career, I was exposed to what public speaking can be, right? And so I did the keynote presentation. I was like Googling stuff. I didn't know who to reach out to about how to craft my messaging, but I had had enough practice in high school to formulate something. And
Uh-huh.
so my very first keynote presentation was that. And then the next one followed, I think 2 months later, because someone in the audience wanted me to go to their conference. And that's how my public speaking journey really began. But at the same time, I grew up in San Francisco and my dream was always to I didn't know what they did in those tall buildings, but my dream was always to work in one of those tall buildings because to me, right, growing up low income, that meant that I would have financial stability. I didn't know what it meant, but I just was like, if I work there, that means financial stability and that means something new, something different from myself and my family.
Okay.
So I got a job in tech and I was in internal communications, the DEI space, and transitioned into social impact, community management. I was there for 8 years and I had always had this that is what success looks like for me.
Okay.
Right? I was like, "Oh, ya tengo el trabajo aquí en tech. I'm in the high-rise buildings. I'm eating lunch every day." Like it was completely transformational for me.
Okay.
Invitaba a mi mamá, I was like, to come to the office and eat with me. I was finally able to purchase stuff for her that, like, "Oh, yo te compro el avión, the ticket," right? Like, "Oh, let's go to Mexico," right? Because when my mom finally was able to go to Mexico, we started going a little bit more often, like, "Oh, yo te lo compro." And the tech industry really afforded me the ability to, one, be exposed to really everything that's out there, but the understanding of there is money out there and I just have to know how to ask for it. And the combination of being a public speaker as well and getting paid for it. I was like, we don't need to be like, this could be someone's entire career, right? The public speaking. And up until January of this year is I had always done public speaking as a side hustle. I'd get asked to speak somewhere and then I'd take some time off and go do it and then fly back home. In
Wow.
2021, which is probably when a whole bunch of people started a lot of businesses and trying to find out what really they truly loved, I was like, "You know what?" At my tech job, I had the opportunity to be a host for one of their talk shows, one of their virtual talk shows, and I was interviewing celebrities like Reggie Watts and talking to them about just cool stuff, right? And I was like,
Okay.
"This I love doing this." And I don't think that people expect me to be this way and to be actually kinda good at this because I am an
Uh-huh.
introvert. And so I decided and because the layered of in the tech industry, we're still very underrepresented, right? In all the industries, really, especially public speaking. And so that's where I thought about the idea of starting to share my public speaking journey and tips on my platform, Chats with Yvonne. And then that transitioned into public speaking consulting, right? Like, "Hey, Yvonne, can you lead workshops around this?" I'm like, "I totally can because I've been doing the learning and development part of it in the tech industry as well.
Yeah.
So I am well versed in facilitating learning." Right. And so I thought, and I have this passion and expertise around public speaking. And so
So
that's
all the
really where my
things
consulting, yeah, that's where the consulting started. And now
I
it's
was gonna say
developed
that's where all the things came together.
exactly. And I realized that public speaking was that for me. I was like, this is the way that I merge my love for community and the impact that I want to create, but also the ability for people to make money off of this. Right? Like, and it doesn't have to be, "Hey, I wanna get on stage and get paid to speak." It could be, "Hey, I am a great public speaker, and because of that, I'm getting a promotion in my current job." Right? It's just to me, I wanted to really shine light on what it means to be a public speaker, and that we could also be doing it, and that we could get paid for it if that's something that you would like to do. And that's how I started Chats with Yvonne, really, in my consulting business, and then been there ever since, been doing that.
Wow. It is amazing to think about what a different experience you had even from your younger years, right? This opportunity to be an MC, this opportunity to talk about the knowledge that you've already harnessed and then just be able to express it. Like these are experiences are not common for a lot of people in terms of like finding out they're good at public speaking, right? Because what defines is like somebody's good or somebody's bad, but it's a lot of it is also like the practice, being able to have the opportunity, being able to even just conceptualize this is something that can be done and that can be done by me. And if I find enjoyment in it, keep going and keep doing it. And so it sounds like even then early on, you were able to find some of those experiences and those opportunities to develop yourself. It makes me think about, so it's a fun, kind of like fun fact about me. I grew up Jehovah's Witness. So I grew up knocking on doors, right? And so there's been a commentary, something that I did, and you're such a good public speaker, right? And it's like, oh, I was knocking doors when I was like 6 years old. Like, let
Yeah.
me read like this to you or something, right? Which is like a uh something that's a complicated part of my story. But there's this part about the public speaking that I think a couple years ago I had this realization. I was like, no, like I've been preparing to public speak almost my entire life. And then in fact, when I was a kid, I used to love radio shows and I used to think about how fun it would be to have a radio show. And Míranos aquí ahora, right? And so
I
this
have a
childhood
podcast.
experience, I know I
Yeah.
have a podcast, I was like about a radio show basically. And so it's like this experience is when we are younger, right? I don't know that I even as I said, if I come to a couple years that I realized that this experience that I had had as a child growing up had prepared me to get to this point where like I can teach, I can stand in front of a public, and I can, uh, talk about like the things that I'm like really confident about. And it sounds like for you as well in your early childhood, just started having some of those experiences, but you were able to hone in at some point. Hey, there's a big opportunity here.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think public speaking allowed me the ability to understand that yo tenía un plan, and I had this plan because of how I grew up, right? So I didn't know I grew up in San Francisco, like the epitome of tech, right? It wasn't always like that, but growing up and thinking about going to college and then what is going to be my next step, like I always had an idea of what my next step was going to be because and explored all my interests. I think
Mhm.
that's one of the biggest things for me is even in your public speaking really honing in on what your interests are because again something is knocking at your door every single day of your life
Absolutely.
and we either choose to accept it or we're like para la otra eso es para tomorrow, right, y lo dejamos para mañana, but it's always going to continue to show up. So if there is something that keeps showing up for you, really dive into it and dissect it. Really try to understand your own journey within it because I think that's what creates powerful public speakers, right? And it doesn't have to be public speaking. You don't have to enjoy public speaking, but let's say you really love the way that glass is formed, right? And
Mhm.
then you dive into that interest and you find that you have a really unique perspective or technique that no one else has really tried or your approach is just different because of your lived experiences. You could potentially talk about that, and it might make public speaking just a little bit less scary.
Mhm. I love that. Would you say that at this point, public speaking now officially that you moved into chats with Yvonne, you have your product, we're gonna be talking about all those things, and like this is what you're doing. Would you say that you have defined this at as your purpose to be in front of an audience, telling compelling stories, sharing your voice from a perspective that is not commonly found there? Like, how have you? What is the intersection of your purpose that you see in this world and public speaking, and now that you've gone in full in and you're taking the space and all of us are recognizing you out there, how what has that meant for you as you kind of think about your purpose, Yvonne's purpose in this planet to live the world just a little bit better?
Oh, it means the world to me. I think I always, when people ask me, you know what, I don't know if anyone has ever asked you, what song would you like, what's your theme song, right? I always think of I Was Here by Beyonce because it just signifies this like, even if I'm not here, there is something that I've left behind that keeps people going, right? So
Mm,
I always think about, my legacy really is whatever I'm able, the seed of curiosity that I'm able to plant in someone else. And public speaking is my vehicle for doing that, right? Not only in the way that I tell my stories, but in the tools that I'm able like because I have the tools and I have the experience and the knowledge around it, that is the one tool that I can provide you, right? I can't teach you how to I don't know why I am saying glass because of I have a glass cup in front of me, but I can't teach you how to form glass. I can't teach you how to do all these other things, but the thing that I contribute to the world is being able to teach you a different way of thinking about your public speaking and implementing those best practices. And so I do think that this is my purpose in life again is to just plant the seed of curiosity and I think that's main thing that we should all aim to do, even in our own public speaking as storytellers, is you may not get someone to act right away based off the story that you told, but just planting that seed of curiosity might make it so that eventually that action grows into, actual execution. And I would say that that is my purpose, but even more than that, I think it's creating the types of spaces where people can practice their public speaking and feel like they can step into it in whatever way they would like to, right? Because I for so long when I started my public speaking journey, I felt like I was trying to assimilate or trying to be a little bit more like what I saw on stages because I didn't see myself fully represented.
Mhm.
And at the same time, right, because I was working in tech and I am an introvert, this means that sometimes I don't like small talk. My energy might be depleted on the day that you come talk to me. I'm a little bit more reserved, but once I start talking, you can't get me to shut up, right? And so it was this almost like a double life going from I work in tech, and even within tech, I would do presentations and I would lead company-wide meetings. And whenever I was done with those, people were like, "Gosh, Yvonne, you're so good. How did you get so good?" And I would not tell them about, "Oh, I actually do
I
public
have this
speaking."
little
Like,
secret life.
like I am a public speaking consultant. I have chats with Yvonne, right? And I'm working on that, right? I'm working on posting about it on LinkedIn, posting about it with my friends, that kind of stuff. But I do think that my legacy again is that seed of curiosity, but also creating the types of spaces that allow for us to really see ourselves as public speakers and actually be in the essence of what it's
Yeah.
like to be a public speaker.
Yeah. What was that like when people would find out, when they would tell you, "Oh, you're so good at this," and you'd be like, "Actually, yeah, this is like my whole other life. Like I do this for a living too." It's
Yeah.
like, sorry you
I
haven't seen it here, but like I am a professional.
yeah, someone was like, Yvonne, you should really consider, like, teaching classes on this because so many people don't and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." I was like, "Is this the moment? Like, should I say it right now?" Y la verdad no sé por qué, right? It was this fear of being perceived, but I liked the comfort of just being a little bit more reserved when I was in tech, right? Or in my corporate job, especially because if you work in tech too, right? Like, you have your people and some community, but it also exposing yourself at large when you already are kind of not the odd one out, but just there's a lot of things within the any corporate job that don't feel as safe to be, right? To be your full or sometimes half self or whatever. And so I remember when people would bring it up, it's like, "Oh, thank you." Like, "Oh, thanks so much." Like, "Thank you." Right? I and that was it. I would just take the compliment and just say, "Okay, gracias." Right? And them not knowing that I lead public speaking workshops and do all this stuff. And I actually recently just had one of my old coworkers reach out and she's like, "Yvonne, what?" She's like, "I had no idea you did all this." And really the transition for me happened when I launched my cards. I was like, the public speaking consultation and the one-on-ones that I have are very private to me and the person
Mhm.
or private to me in the workshops that I lead and all that kind of stuff. But the cards, right? That's a whole new challenge, a whole new product-based business that I have never actually done before. And it requires me to be a little bit more out there, to be a little bit more like, I can't just submit my speaker pitch and wait to get accepted. And now I have the opportunity, right? It's like, this is a product that I constantly have to be sharing with the world so that they know that it's out there. And as much support as I can get, that it is a good thing. And so I posted about it on my like personal page and everyone was like, "What? Yvonne, what?" And my coworker, she sent me a 3-minute voice message. She's like, "This is amazing." She's like, "It does not surprise me at all." Right? She's like, "It's not surprising at all, but I just didn't know that you did this. And I'm gonna join one of your workshops if that's okay with you. Like I would love to learn from you." And so what I learned from that is that we have such a hard time understand like feeling like, "Oh, I don't wanna be perceived. I don't want people to know about this about me." But because these are your skill sets, because you're good at what you do, it doesn't surprise people when I do tell them that,
Mhm.
because it's like, "Oh, that makes a ton of sense." The fact that you didn't share it, it's like, "Why didn't you?" Because I wouldn't have judged you. I think my thing was always like, what if they're like, "Pero cómo puede ser public speaker if she's so introverted?" Right?
Because the
And
people at work got to see you like on the day to day, and so there's like the creation of like a persona. This is who you are. This is how I
working on
see you, and then talking about your public speaking and so challenges
yeah.
what people are seeing on the day to day.
Exactly, and being big and bold on stage and, like, embodying the true essence of myself as a speaker, right? I We had quarterly meetups because we were working remotely, and even prior to, I would lead the company-wide meetings, but at company-wide meetings, I'd always present on some of the initiatives that I was working on for social impact and community management, and folks would always be like, "Oh my gosh, what? I didn't even know you could do that." Or they had mentioned to me that they always looked forward to my presentations and because I just spoke so well, and at first, it made me really uncomfortable because I'm like, "Oh my god, me van a descubrir." And then I was like, "Van a pensar que les estaba mintiendo," or that like, "Where did this skill come from?" type of thing. And I realized, again, it's something that has been knocking at my door for a really long time, and it truly is a part of what I do, right? Not only does I don't believe that it comes to me naturally. I think the interest in it is what comes to me naturally, and because I'm interested and passionate about it, it translates into skill set, into knowledge, into being able to execute on it. And yeah, it's still a little awkward, but I'm getting
Yeah.
more and more okay with it. And I still have yet
Good.
to post on LinkedIn about it though. I have to post on LinkedIn already.
It's coming though. It's
It is,
coming.
it is.
What it makes me think about is that the ways that we end up compartmentalizing ourselves, not even on purpose, right? It's like I could just imagine you being like, the goal is to work in a high rise, go to UC Berkeley, work in a high rise, work in tech. That is kind of like that first gen sort of like path, right? Like you know what step follows next to the best of your ability. And so you're like trying to stay there. But then you have this whole other public speaking, and it's like, well, how does that fit with like the rest of my life? If what I went to college is for this, if what I prepare is for this, right? How do I make sense of these two worlds coming as one? Because in many ways, I think, like I'm a photographer. I have like this whole other life as a photographer, right? And it's just like, but how does it fit to be a therapist and to be a professor and to be a photographer? Like they don't go together, right? And it has been like this kind of different parts of life that only if you know me really well, then you will find this other part about me. Or if you met me through photography and then you find out I'm a therapist, people were like, what? Like, you're a therapist? And it's like, yeah. And there are people that know I'm a therapist and I tell them I'm a photographer. They're like, what? Like, so it's like being part of being first gen is also about how do we create our own persona after we get to know ourselves and get really comfortable, because for many, I think people experience that they've had to compartmentalize the things that they're really good at if they don't always go with the thing that they went to school for and they kind of like follow that path.
Sí, claro, and I mean, we see the examples of it even growing up, right? Like, I think about, what are my mom's hobbies? I don't even know what those are, right? Now she's going to Zumba y toda la cosa because she doesn't have kids in the house, like, my sister went off to college, right? But I think about us not growing up seeing all of the different aspects of people being able to freely show up,
Yeah.
right? Like, si eres una fotógrafa and you're there, like, it doesn't mean that you can't be all of them. In fact, they all kind of inform one another, right?
Mhm.
And I think about this too in my friendships because I'm very like, I don't mix my friend groups much. Like, it's rare when I have a get together. It's probably only for my birthday if I celebrate it that year or do like a group celebration. But I have my middle school friends that I've been friends with. Those are my sisters, right? Everybody knows about each other, Rosie and Avalon. They represent a very different part of who I am, right? I always joke around and I tell them, honestly, we probably wouldn't be friends if we didn't meet in middle school because we're so different now. We've gone into different directions, but our center remains the same. I have my friends from high school, right? They're the jokester. Like, I think every single one of my friend groups represents a different part of who I am. And sometimes it's hard to think about all those different parts of myself coming together and actually existing in the world at
Mhm.
all at one time. So I'm connecting it to kind of all of our different interests. It's kind of
Yeah.
hard to envision how the public speaker, the tech person, the runner, the all this stuff, all the introvert, sometimes maybe extroverted tendencies kind of all come into one room together, and it almost becomes overwhelming to think about
Yeah.
all of them
To
being
hold it
there
all at the same
at the
time. Yeah.
same time. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I do think though that public speaking itself has been the connector, right? Like, I think about my partner as the connector for all my friend groups because they all wanna meet him, right? They all wanna see, like, "Who's this guy that Yvonne's spending all her time with?" Right? It's the equivalent of, public speaking, Yvonne's doing this 24/7. Like, I need to be let into that world.
Uh-huh.
And I think it takes a very specific type of experience or even person too to feel comfortable to bring those things together and merge it all. And I think public speaking is that for me. It's like everybody to some capacity can tell me about their experience with public speaking, whether it's good or bad. They love it, they hate it, they're not sure about it.
Yeah.
And that makes it worthwhile to me. Everybody has a story with public speaking. I find myself just, randomly hanging out with friends, or they'll invite me to their stuff, and someone will know that, "Oh, yeah, that's Chats with Yvonne, right?" Like, "Oh," and they'll tell me, I remember they just naturally start telling me about their public speaking, and I love it. I
Me
think
too.
that's almost I know you asked me about what my purpose is, that's almost my purpose, right? Is I want public speaking to be top of mind for you, and I
Yeah.
want you to love it because you realize how connected you already are to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what keeps coming to my mind as you speak, right? It's that actually we're not realizing how much we're doing public speaking sometimes, right? And so until somebody like you comes in front, maybe it's even like as a therapist, I experience the same thing that sometimes I'm like, I want to talk to my therapist here because I know sort of like what the conversation that follows this, but sometimes when I'm like energized and when I'm like in like all the stars cross a day. I'm like, tell me everything about you because I am a therapist and I really enjoy it and I really want to know about it. But there are times, and so maybe different, like I'm an extrovert or maybe I'm like I have my downs too. But most of the time I would consider myself an extrovert, that there's this expectation that all of you has to be out there up front. And so for you as an introvert, knowing that about yourself, I could imagine even that keeping this separate lives is almost like a protection also, so that your energy is like consensually being put out there. It's not
Oh,
just all the time
100%.
just out there, right? And so how do you define introversion? How did you come to get this label that you're like, I am an introvert. I claim it, I call it out. You even talk about public speaking for introverts, right? Even though extroverts we're getting a lot from you too.
Mm.
So it's
Yeah.
for everyone.
Well, that's the thing, right? I want it to be this almost like a universal experience because, well, one, I think we need labels sometimes to make sense of our experiences, but they're not an end all be all, right? But I talk about my experiences and I share the way that I craft a lot of my programming is from a lens of what would myself as an introvert need here, right? Like at the Latina Presente event, I was like conversation cards because sometimes it's not that we will use them, but we just like the safety net of having an activity to do. Like, oh, the host told me to do it, so I'm going to do it, type of thing. And then we're better, like we're good. We could continue the conversation, right? And there definitely are misconceptions about what I think it means to be an introvert. For
I think
example,
they are. Mhm.
someone said something on Threads like, "Oh, if you're an introvert, that must mean you're probably on Threads a lot more than you're on Instagram." I was like, "I actually have no problem recording a video because when you think about putting your face in front of something, I think of being an introvert as my energy management, right? What consumes my energy and what gives me energy. And that I think is what I mostly, right? Most of the time, being in large crowds and with people, that drains my energy, but it doesn't mean that I don't love it at the same time,
Mm.
right? It means I am in front of large crowds of people. And then right after that, I'm gonna need a couple days to like sit and reflect with it. We're very when what it means to be introverted is we're introspective. We think a lot, right? We're in our heads a lot about good or bad, right? We think critically. We're like, oh, this interaction or this that, right? And so I think that being an introvert is actually one of my strengths as a public speaker, only because I've already thought about 10,000 different ways that I could communicate this, and I came to the conclusion that this is probably the best one because it fits this, like, "Oh, but what if there's this type of person in the room? Well, what if there's this type of person in the room? How do I tell this story?" Right? And so I think even, to what I was referring to about posting videos or being kind of a content creator, right, that's also an introvert, no one is here with me
Mm.
when I'm recording this video, right? Like, yes, the energy depletion part of it sometimes often is like, I can't tell you how many drafts I have, often is thinking about how it's going to go out into the world
Mhm.
and not the actual act of it. So, public speaking becomes this thing that I love doing. And I love crafting my story and putting a speech together and talking about it, right? It's the execution of it that I often have to prepare for and say, okay, I'm going to be speaking for 15 minutes on this stage. What do I need to do right before? And what do I need to do right after to make sure that this continues to be an experience for me that revitalizes me? That's like, okay, that was a freaking amazing. Every time I get off the stage, I'm like, I want to do that again, but in 5 days. Right?
Yeah.
Like, so I think being an introvert really is about that introspection and being really internalizing all of our thoughts. And it's not so much about us not liking to hang out with people. It's just about us managing the energy exchange.
What are some of those internalized messages? Because you're talking, I hear throughout the sprinkle of like the perception that people have of you is that you're quiet, that you're kind of reserved, that you're you're not going to be like the first person like upfront with things, right? So finding out that you are actually an amazing public speaker and that you enjoy it, right? Not only being good at it, but that you also enjoy it and that you don't mind practicing and kind of getting better at this craft. What have you had to unpack within yourself from those misconceptions about being an introvert as you've been in this journey? Like, what have been those messages that you have found that maybe they don't even belong to you, that they've been imposed onto you, or they've been told that this is how, as an introvert or as a shy person or as a quiet person, that you should act? What have you found within yourself that you've had to like challenge or battle or be conscientious of, like that doesn't necessarily ring true for me, even if for other people who are introverted, they might resonate with them.
Yeah, I think the idea of becoming smaller, becoming less visible, uh, I think sometimes people think that introverts don't like the spotlight, and yes and no. There are certain spotlights that we will gladly take, right?
Definitely.
And in particular, they have to do with the things we're really passionate about. If I'm not passionate about talking to you about numbers, which like I am not a numbers person and I'm working on it, that don't call on me. I will not raise my hand and don't call on me,
Okay.
right? The other part of it, talk to me about public speaking, about your storytelling, about the things that I care about, right? Like running. Oye, ¿quieres cafecito? Oh yeah, what goes into making the perfect cup of coffee at home, right? Ask me about those things and we light up, right? So I think
Exactly.
the idea of I always felt this like, oh, being shy and being an introvert are completely different things, right? And I
Mhm.
always thought that they were the same thing because that's how other people defined how I was. And I played on to that, right? Because it was safer to be like, ay, sí, está mejor, así me quedo shy. I'll be reserved and shy.
I
It's
love
fine,
it.
right? And I think as I've grown in my public speaking journey, it's still something that I am very aware of because at the same time, the way that I approach public speaking, I want people to be to feel like they are invited to step into it. And so I am very conscious of the way that I talk and the energy that I myself even exude when I'm talking about public speaking. And so it's a little bit of a balance where I always, I went back and forth, right? Shy, reserved, así soy. Then like, no, you have to be bolder and express yourself and all this stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be bold. Like, let me wear the bold colors and bold pattern, right? And then realizing, wait, which is that me or is that me thinking that I'm going anti the people that think, oh, I'm shy and reserved because I can be bold, right? And so I think my public speaking journey has allowed me to just be. It's like there's certain days where I definitely want to wear the brightest colors, right? Because it feels good in my essence. And it's a little bit of a conversation starter, especially if I'm going to a networking event, right? I'm like, I already know myself. I'm not going to initiate the conversation. So I'm going to wear something that might get someone's attention to come up to me. And then I'll be a great conversationalist after that,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
There are other times where I don't want to take up space, where I don't think it's suitable for me to take up as much space. And I embody that both in what I wear and how I act and the energy that I exude. And I think it's important to find that balance, right? I don't to my introverts out there too, I don't think that your lack of boldness in what you're wearing or loudness in what you're saying says anything to me about the incredible public speaker that you are or people person that you are or anything like that. And I think that's a misconception that even us as introverts really internalize. No,
Very.
es que yo no soy así. I'm not the loudest person in the room. And I'm okay with that because when I do take the mic and when I do take the stage, I'm going to have something really good to say. And I'm okay with one, either waiting my turn or challenging myself to raise my hand and say, hey, I have something to say, right? Like you kind of know when they're not giving me the mic. I have to step up and say something.
Yeah.
Or, you know what? I'm not going to take up space in this moment. And I want to wait until I'm given the mic type of thing. I think there's this balance that we all kind of have to keep in mind. And especially as an introvert, it's okay. It's okay to be a little bit more simple. If it's not your thing to wear the, I think for a while the red lipstick and gold hoops became like like Latina. This is like who
Simple.
Latinas are. Yeah, it's like if that's not you, that's okay. You
Mm.
can wear the, let's say, the colorful ones, or maybe just your studs, and it doesn't take away from your, what I would call, like, your boldness of being a public speaker, right? Like, your voice
Mm.
can do that for you.
So if anything, like what I'm hearing you say really is that owning this label as an introvert is like a lens that you use to explain when and how do you show up at your best. That knowing that you're an introvert allows you then to have a little pep talk with yourself about what you may need, about where your energy is, about how you're going to show up depending on how you're feeling, what that day, what that day looks like, what the stars are right on that season. And so being an introvert allows you to stay really connected and mindful and present with what is it that I need today to be able to do this thing that I really love. And that sometimes maybe easier to access, some other days may be harder to access, but at the end of the day, I know that I want to do it. And so knowing these things about myself is helping me build the bridge so that I can do it well and in my terms.
100%. And I think being an introverted public speaker and leading with that allows me to also tap into the misconceptions of being an introvert so that people can start to see, oye, pero si Yvonne is really good or this other introvert is really good at public speaking, why did I think that they weren't? Or
Mm.
if they are really, my interactions with Yvonne maybe have been that she's a great conversationalist and she won't shut up. How is she, because there are layers to all of us, right? We're not just
Yes.
one way of being. And so I think even leading with the fact that I'm an introvert has also allowed for other people in their respective fields and industries to say, okay, are they too quiet and they're not raising their hand and they're not participating in class? Or do they need a different environment,
Mhm.
different kind of tools to be able to say something, right? Because as introverts, we've been thinking about it. We just haven't said it out loud. And
Yeah.
when we do say it out loud, it's like, what? Like, no way,
Yeah.
right? So I think that also leading with my introversion is also a call to action to all of us to really dissect what our belief of being an introvert is, or being a great public speaker is. It goes beyond the, oye, so I'm an introvert. It's really, I want to open up conversations and spaces for every single person to be able to show up as themselves, whatever that looks like in that moment. And if you're an introvert, knowing that your unique essence is exactly what we need in the art of public speaking. And if you're an extrovert, like, no matter, it doesn't matter who you are, right? It's really just about dissecting you internally and showing up as that.
Yeah. When I teach, I create community agreements. And one of the ones that I always offer is this idea of step up, step back, right? As an extrovert, sometimes I'm like, it's too quiet. It's what's happening, right? And so there is a part of the extroversion that sometimes is like tied to my anxiety, right? It's just like, oh, like it got awkward, right? And so I have to have a reminder of just like that there are some people, and I through the years, my career also as a therapist, right? It's like sometimes this the silence is incredibly powerful and you have to be in it and you have to wait for like that magic moment to show up, right? And so both introverts knowing themselves but also extroverts knowing themselves is like kind of what you're advocating for, is a world that kind of can serve both purposes. It's like the people that need to step up, like what, and I ask my students, like, what do you need in this environment to encourage you to step up, right? Is it the long pause and the silence and just to say, we're just gonna sit with the stuff, see if anybody wants to share something, right? And I could imagine people are like inside, like, do I share, do I share, do I not share? Do I say something, right? And then you'll see the hand go up, right? And then for the extrovert, sometimes it's like, no, you're gonna want to say something right away. Just sit with it just a little bit longer and see how it metabolizes before you
Sí.
step out. Because we want to hear from everybody, right? But it is like, how do we create environments that are fitting the needs of everybody in the room? Just like that classroom teacher, that is just like, I ask a question and nobody's talking, right? And I'm just going to assume that they're not interested. And there could be an introvert in your classroom or in your training or one of your coworkers who you may think that they're just a little bit quieter or shyer, they don't have anything to say, but actually they're just probably trying to find the moment that feels right for them and
See,
try to be open up that space, right? So that
yeah.
they can feel comfortable
I
also
love that.
sharing.
I love that. Time and give us things to do, right? Like
Yes.
I think about the layers of when I was in college, for example, being first gen and an introvert and all these other things, right? It's like even more so, I'm not gonna raise my hand. I'm just gonna wait, right? But when we get into smaller discussions, I have thoughts and I share those thoughts. It's just when it comes back to the larger group, yeah, I do need more time. Like there were so many times where I was like about to speak and my heart was pounding, my cheeks felt like I had little piquetes and my
Mhm.
blood was rushing to my cheeks and I was this close from saying something and we would move on and I was like, okay, well, I'm just not going to say it,
Yeah.
right? And I also think that in my roles in tech, they were what quote unquote would be more for extroverts, right? Like leading company meetings, facilitating community, all these things. And so there are times where I still revert to that. And I'm like, oh my God, the awkward silence. Oh my God, do I have to, are people talking? Do they need something from me? Like what can I do to add to this, right? Or to facilitate. And so it's been something too interesting too, to learn and unlearn what parts of myself are actually myself and what parts did I learn from my experiences and what parts do I want to keep and what parts are actually me and I or not and I have to let go of.
Mhm, mhm. The question that comes to my mind now is about the intersection of also being Latina, right? Because I can think of about things like Marianismo, right, as a Latinx culture value that women are supposed to aspire to be meek and quiet and of service and not taking space. Or we have like the line, "Carita te ves más bonita," right? And so that there is this ways in that depending on the intersection, whether you're a queer person, a Latinx person, a person who comes from a collectivistic culture, individualistic culture, right? That there is so much that we also have been fed and have internalized from our culture. And so, what do you see on your end, both from your experience, but maybe from working with other Latinas, because you're being very also with Latina Presente, right? Like you are being intentional about working with Latina. What do you see at the intersection of Latinidad and public speaking? and and potentially talk to people, how should people start framing this conversation with themselves about like what are the things that I enjoy? Do I enjoy taking space? When do I enjoy taking space? And how has my culture, my family, machismo, right, like told me to be small and to not take space? And I'm already introverted. I already don't want to take the space, right? So all of these things, what do you see with the folks that you're working with or as you're putting intention and creating Latina Presente to encourage folks to, push through, fight back, to reframe some of this messaging that comes from our families and our culture?
Yeah, I love this question because I think about it every single day, right? I think one of the stories that I've shared before is that because I grew up with a single mom, my mom is, I don't know if you're into astrology, but my mom is a Virgo. She's very outspoken. Despite anything that she's ever been through, she's always led with, no, a mí no me vas a tratar así, o esto, lo otro. And not the combination of me being more reserved and introvert and having a mother like that,
Mm,
I grew up for a really long time hearing, "Oh, así calladita," or oh, my mom was a rebel, right? She didn't marry. She's one of 7 children. She's the youngest, and all her sisters have been married with their husbands for years. They have kids, very traditional marriages, right? And my mom has just never been like that, right? And so I think the combination of I'm an introvert and I saw my mom be big and bold
mhm,
at first was like, "Oh my god, mom, like it's too much for me. Why can't you be more like my tías que así para no llamar la atención tanto?" Right? Because of my own introversion and being reserved. But because of that, I think when I saw and at the same time, I'm such an advocate for no, you're not gonna tell me to shut up. Like I always think about this. It's like as an introvert, when we say something, when we're bold in our expression, you know, when they say, "Oh, if something dropped, in the woods, did it actually happen? Like, did you hear it?" It's like, I may not be heard across the woods, but I'm going to be heard in my immediate community and where I am, right? And I think that's the balance that being a Latina within our household and an introvert, right? It's like you get to it's not that we're not bold, it's not that we don't speak out, it's not that we can't or won't. Again, it goes back to that passion that we have, and we will speak up when it needs to be said. right? And we've thought about it for a really long time. So when I talk about public speaking, I tell my mom this all the time. It's like I learned public speaking from you and from my abuelita
Mm,
and from the people in my family because we are storytellers. That's how we've passed down. When I would go to Mexico and my abuelita would tell stories about my mom that when she was a kid, I didn't know those because when my mom came at the age of 15 to the US, there was a whole part of her that just focused on surviving, right? And just being like
mhm,
getting day to day and working. And so my time and going back to Mexico allowed me to know my mom in a different way. And so I think that one, not only have we been storytelling for generations and generations, it's how you learn about el chisme de la familia, but also at the same time, how you learn about how you should, I don't know, how you should do stuff, right? It's just what we do. It's how we pass down knowledge and education. And so I think that by tapping into a lot of the people that I've worked with, and as Latinas, we think that there's this ideal of what we should sound like, what we should look like. And this is no shame if anybody does use this because it's very much a thing that you decide to embody. But even I when I first started public speaking, there was the if you don't know what to do with your hands, just hold them right in front of you like a little triangle. And that to me does not feel authentic to me, right?
mhm,
As Latinas, we use our hands a lot and we tell stories in this way. And so I think something that I have learned is we have to embody the very things that are a part of our cultura, right? Like the hand gestures, the voice inflection that you hear cuando te grita tu mamá, or when you're having a conversation and they're really passionate about it. Like we know how to public speak and how to tell stories already. We just have to learn to identify those very things as being great public speakers because then we won't need to really look elsewhere. Everything else will be supplemental to what we already know. And so I think that I could talk about a lot more for days too, but I think that our Latinidad is really what creates our essence as a speaker.
mhm,
And through reflection and tapping into it a lot more, because we have been conditioned so often in all of the
mhm,
spaces that require us to be quote unquote professional, or like as first gen, where we got our foot in the door because we went to college and we did this and we did that, right?
mhm.
Like we didn't have a network. And so for so many years, we've had to dilute a lot of what for so many years, we've had to dilute a lot of what makes us us, and it's going to be hard to bring that back into the frame. But if we once we do it, it becomes our most powerful tool for understanding ourselves as speakers and being those powerful public speakers that we all want to be.
What I keep hearing from you as we go through this interview is this idea that like public speaking can be for those who choose it. Because even though you hear Vaughn talking so highly about this and you're an introvert, this is not, you don't have to be a public speaker if you don't want to. You can choose not
Nope.
to. But
Mhm.
for those who may feel curious or called to say, like, actually, I do have things to say. And for a variety of reasons, I have not felt that I could take the space. What I keep hearing is that public speaking can really be this avenue to tell your story and to take the space that maybe because of the circumstances you have not even been able to discover for yourself. Maybe you just assume that you're not good at these things. But if public speaking interests you and calls you, it could be a really big avenue for healing those internalized messages and for reframing this self concept, right? And even self esteem of just like, how do you see yourself? How do you see your value? That your story has value, that others are going to want to hear it. And if you feel called to it, if you share it, you're going to gain a lot from it.
See, and the stories, the conversations too with your families, right? I always share this, what I shared about my abuelita and hearing those stories and how it felt like I was more connected to my mom, even when she wasn't able to tell me those stories. And I have never told my mom that before, but she heard me say it out loud and share the story, right? And she was like, "Oh, I didn't even know that." And so that created a conversation starter for my mom and I to have conversations about that and what my experience was like. And then I'm sure it was like, "Oh, well, I should probably tell you more stories," right? And
You
she's
see?
more intentional about telling me those stories from her childhood and things that shaped her because at the end of the day, that's what we have. We have each other's stories and we have our people to talk to, right? And so I think even diving into the art of public speaking and sharing a part of your story and doing so ethically, right? Involving folks to the capacity that they're even comfortable in sharing, um, allows for this healing also within the family unit because you bring up conversations that you may not have and reflections that you may not have
Mhm.
otherwise, and prompted to ask you about them.
Absolutely. Sometimes there are so many stories that haven't been told, just because there hasn't been space, not because they don't want to be shared, but there
Mhm.
hasn't been like a place to be found, or like somebody that cares, right? Or somebody that is asking. And so, that imagery of you talking to your mom and then your mom being like even more generous and say, well, let me tell you more stories then, right? Like it opens something really beautiful. The other part that was coming to my mind, I just had a conversation with a good friend of mine, and she was saying that how cool is it going to be for us in like 30, 40, maybe it's like 2080, and then somebody finds like this podcast and like a very outdated, like retro sort of like, what is this, right? And they press play. But like, my friend was saying about how we don't have record over like our great grandmothers, our grandmothers, like la risa, el chiste,
See?
the
Oh my gosh.
intonation, right? Like all of these things, and what a gift it is. Not even if you don't want to do it publicly, right? But to take the space of speaking the truth and speaking the stories and creating a record. Because like I just shared with you, like the whole purpose of the podcast, it's just like I end up having all these conversations that are so amazing all the time. And I'm like, maybe one person out there wants to hear about it. Maybe one person can benefit from hearing me chat with Yvonne, right? And to see themselves in a new perspective because of this conversation. But also, one day, somebody in my lineage, right, could come back and say, like, what did my tia sound like when she was like
Yes.
in
Oh
her
my
40s,
goodness.
right?
Yes.
What was she interested in? What did she talk about? So, in a way, it becomes like an anthology of like who you are as a person. And that is so valuable because our generations before didn't have this opportunity of a lot of the oral storytelling, right? If somebody and finish talking about it, even in Coco in the movie, right? Like when the last person that is talking about you, that's when you finally die. And like we're trying to keep a record so that our memories and our stories and those stories of those before us that we know about can keep alive, right? And so this is very exciting. I'm loving this conversation about public speaking.
Oh, you froze for a little bit, but I think it
Oh,
still records it. But
yes. Yeah.
I I 100% agree. I've actually, in fact, told this to when I first started chats with Yvonne and started posting about public speaking. That is the very thing I told my friend. I said, "You know how many times I wish that I could hear my mom's voice when she was a little girl, or
Mm,
understand what her cuál eran sus mañas, like how did she talk, what were her facial expressions like there have been so many times when I wish that I had record of that. And not that I know if I'll have kids in the future or whatever it is, it's not for that reason, but I think that there's something so powerful about, you're right, documenting it. And even if it isn't I'll say my voice right now, the way that it sounds right now is going to be completely different than what it sounds years from now. And
mm,
let's say maybe I do have children in the future, that's a different version of who I was today. Like,
mhm.
I would have loved to see the version of my mom that was this, like, free bird that
Yeah,
everybody says she was, right? That was this, no le importaba nada, she did her own thing, she was a rebelde, she was funny, right? And my mom still is very funny and rebelde in her own ways, but it's a lot more diluted now, right?
yeah.
So I so often wish that I had record of my mom. I'm trying to get her to come on my podcast and, like, do
That
stuff
would
with
be
me.
beautiful.
Uh I was like, the day that I can get my mom to do this, to do the interview with me or, be on a panel with me, that's that's literally gonna go plastered all over my website. Like, "Yep, I am a great public speaking consultant because I got my mom to wanna speak to me."
Now that he said, like, this is happening, like, I can already see it happening. You're gonna manifest it. I already hear it.
Yeah,
Okay, well, I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours, but just so, for the sake of respecting your time too, and like our listeners, I do want to touch just as a kind of like a last place with your work at Latina Presente, your new product, your cards, which I am enjoying so much, just like reading through them. I'm using them as a little bit like a journal prompts for me, just like
I
conversations that I'm
love that.
having by myself, like just like, oh, how would I say this? Because I'm not ready necessarily to put it out there. So I'm loving the card deck. But why don't you kind of close us up with just like what talking about your purpose, being an introvert, pursuing your passion, launching new ventures, all of the things that you touch, but like through Latina Presente, how can what do you hope that this will do for our comunidad, for the mujeres out there that are trying to take the space and really own their stories, and tell us a little bit about your product as well.
Yeah. Latina Presente really is the space that I hope to create where or continue cultivating alongside everybody else. that allows you to have confidence in the skill sets of public speaking, but also the space to actually practice it. Because to me, public speaking is so much about the practice. I can give you best practices, I can give you a whole lecture on this is what you should do, this is what your body should do, or voice inflection, all these things. But if you don't actually put them into practice, none of it is, you're not going to feel more in your essence as a speaker. And so Latina Presente is not only, it's in the name, right? It's like presente, like I am here and I am presenting, right? And that's the idea. The idea is I give you, and collectively we create spaces that give you the tools to practice your public speaking, and you also have the ability to share and speak and tell your story. And so the cards themselves were a little bit of a, for my introverts, right? And for those of us that are not yet comfortable with, to your point, right? Like right now, you're journaling about it and you're not necessarily ready to say it out loud. The next step in that is read your journal entry out loud so that you can get comfortable with your voice telling that particular story and then evolving it to whatever it needs to be, right? But the idea is giving doses of public speaking and getting you comfortable with it from the comfort of wherever you are, whether that's your home or um, a hike that you went on with a friend or something, right? Like
Mhm.
having the ability to do this with your people. Sorry.
Perfect.
and and I think that these cards really exemplify just that. Is like, I want you to feel good in your essence first as a speaker and feel practiced and feel comfortable in it, even if you're like, I don't know everything that there is to know, but I know just enough to start my journey or to continue growing in my journey. The cards are meant to provide that for you. And then eventually, right, you come to a Latina Presente event or you go to one of the virtual workshops that I offer every month. And you have the foundation of those cards that sprinkled in our cultura within the public speaking prompts and public speaking best practices, so that it's, we're no longer approaching it from a lens of I'm lacking in this and I need to get better, but actually, oh my gosh, this is already inside of me. I'm already a great public speaker. I just need to practice it more. And Latina Presente is your space to practice it.
And as a person that has attended the Latina Presente event, the person that owns the card deck and is going to be working with you one on one to get the story out of my chest that I want to share, I cannot speak highly enough of, even as an extrovert, even as a person that is really comfortable taking space, there are some parts of storytelling that do not feel comfortable, right? Or that haven't kind of safeguarded because of a variety of reasons. And so, what I'm finding about your community and the event that you're hosting and the people that are coming to the event, because it's also about the community building, is that we all have this in common, that it's like we have stories to tell in our hearts, and for a variety of reasons, we're not sharing them. And you're creating and opening up a space to finally do it. Stop just talking about it and finally do it, right? And so, this you're called to it. Presente, aquí estamos, we're showing up, and Yvonne's gonna keep, opening up the space for all of us, and I'm so, so grateful for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope that it continues to be a space that we can collectively create together, right? Uh, like I said, I keep saying I'm an introvert, so I don't always like being at the center of it all, but I know that sometimes it requires me to be the facilitator, right? So often we have to be the facilitator for other people to feel comfortable within it, but Latina Presente is so much more than just, oh, Yvonne is leading it, or Yvonne is hosting this, or these are Yvonne's cards, because that really is not how I see it. I see it as I am the person that has some kind of tool and I'm sharing it so that everybody else can do what they want with that tool. And I hope that that continues to be at the core and essence of what you all feel like when you do engage with any Latina Presente programming.
Thank you so much for generosity, because this is at the core, is your generous heart of just saying these things that I have learned for me, I want to give them to everybody else as a gift to the world, because we need to take space, and we deserve to take the space if we're called to do so. So on the show notes, I'm going to have all the ways to purchase the cards, to get in touch with you, to follow your social media accounts. And thank you once again so much. We're going to have part two, per three. This is the best part I'm finding about having your podcast. You can just invite people whenever you want to just say, I
Right.
really want to keep talking to you. So we may have part two, three, and who knows? Because I'm about to work with just more, but they want. So maybe we'll just come back and say, like, this is what happened, y'all. So
100%.
amazing. so much once again for being here with us, Entre Tias Amiguis, and until next time.
Gracias.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your tias and amiguis. Your support helps us reach more people and continue these important conversations. And don't forget to follow us on social media and stay connected. Until next time, remember to take care of yourself, embrace your journey, and keep living life with heart, vision, and creativity.